to switch now to Martin Champoux. Martin Champoux, qui est le candidat du Bloc québécois pour Drummond au Québec. Donc, pour
Martin
le Bloc.
Champoux is representing the Bloc Québécois in Quebec. Good evening, good evening. You heard the promises of Mr. Guilbeault earlier. What do you think about this and about the different projects? For example, the horrendous content that may be out there and renewing the act. What do you say? So it will be a pleasure for me to answer your question. First of all, with respect to the commitment that the minister has announced, I believe that he's being a bit late with what he's saying here. And many of my colleagues from different parties share this with me, this opinion. Liberals do things too late and they only go halfway. That's what they do. So let's talk about Bill C-10 because I rapidly want to go over this, but also on the different topics that it is discussed about. We talked about this quite often, and on the crisis of written media. There was supposed to be around March this spring some modifications. But, you know, they're saying things, and I believe that they are in good faith. But when we talk about what they table, well, it's a different thing altogether. You know, the Bill C-10 is a good intention, and they've been in power since 2015. You know, and when we wanted to modernize this act, well, you know, it had to be modernized urgently. It's nothing new when we're talking about the industry, the media, everyone was agreeing and saying that we had to take a look at all of the progress that went through and digital and so on. But when they came in 2020, it was you know, having a canvas, for example, but empty, nothing protected in their bill, the Francophone content and official languages, including Aboriginal languages and so on. So yes, when I hear the minister talking about the commitments of the Liberal Party, I agree with him. I believe that it is important that we set things right, but it could have been done earlier, more completely so. So regarding Bill C-10, you will not be surprised if you saw the work by the Heritage Committee. You will see that I was disappointed to the result of Bill C-10. It came too late. And of course, our conservatory colleagues, the filibuster that took place because of the strange interpretation of one of the provisions of the law. We have worked very hard towards that modernization within the industry and the media. Everybody in Quebec wanted the modernization to be done properly, that is. So it was an enormous disappointment when we saw this didn't go through. So the Bloc Québécois wants to make sure that in the next government there will be another bill that will take up from where we got and put all of the work, and I believe that there's a lot of work to be done into modernizing this act. So I believe that it is more urgent now than when it was tabled in November last. What do you offer from the Bloc Québécois in that sector more concretely? Well, when studying Bill C-10, we brought about many amendments and modifications like valuing the content and having a digital platform. So we wanted people on the digital platform to take advantage of that, but you know, not against the participation of people. You know, people in our sector, like in the broadcasting sector, we have to be helped. I believe that we have not set a regulation that renders our market equitable. It is a nonsense that this has not been performed yet. Even at the beginning of the years 2000, everyone agreed that you know, in broadcasting would be completely changed by the arrival of digitalization. So we failed to regulate that sector, even though everyone was saying that this would be a major change. We should have regulated that and you know, have done the necessary legislative work towards that. So this protection of the francophone content, the protection of Quebec content and the Canadian content here must include the amendment that we brought forth, which were not that popular. We had to fight with liberal and conservatories because we wanted to force the digital platforms to promote the content of people from over here, the directors from over here. We choose a very valuable content. So it makes no sense that there's nothing that was set forth yet. So we only have 2 minutes to talk about theme number 2, invest in talent. You know that we lack manpower in Quebec and Canada currently. How could we support the film industry? Well, first of all, we must realize that we are still going through a crisis, the pandemic. So this has undeniable effect on the entire industry and cultural industry in general. I believe that we should immediately, and I don't want to go through all of these sectors because we're lacking manpower everywhere, and most particularly in Quebec. I believe that all of the programs of assistance were very helpful and generous. And, you know, we must now concentrate this on areas where it is more difficult, more specifically in the cultural setting. So, organizations like Telefilm, for example, funding Telefilm must be adjusted. We offered and proposed that in the spring, and it was a good thing that it was done. And then we want to see the participation of the federal government in the Canadian funds. And this is a request from our industry. These funds have to be maintained and indexed year after year because the demand is growing, and we want to support the growth also. And we want to support the artists within the industry to continue in audiovisual production, series, films, and everything. We need some proper and relevant funding. And since the funds come from the revenues of cable distributors, so, you know, if they have less money, they're not going to participate as much. And there's a ratio also. The industry saw that there was an inequity in the distributions of the amounts, and we want to readjust this to a ratio of 40-60 instead of 30-70. So we want to fix a floor at $300 million at the Arts Council. So, you know, we're all well positioned over here to see that, you know, costs continue increasing. We are going to increase the power of production of our creators. So that's all for our French question.
So I'd like to talk to you, Mrs. Champoux, about the diversity issue. Quebec has done a wonderful job in telling its own stories, in its depiction of its history, its stars, its comedians. Everyone loves the broadcasting area in Quebec. Audiences are high. How can you replicate this success with people who are not Québécois, who are Indigenous particularly, or from other countries? What room is there for their stories, would you say?
Je vous dirais qu'il y a beaucoup de réponses à cette
I would
question-là.
tell you that many answers to those questions would be found in the Bill C-10. If I understood properly your question, in Bill C-10, there were provisions making sure that all groups would be represented, the diversity would be well represented, the real state, social and demographics of Quebec would be better represented in the broadcasting industry in Quebec. So when we're talking about the modernization of this bill or act that we had, how can we see people that are not Canadian be represented in this industry? So first of all, the productions, to use an expression that Mrs. Yale used in one of our meetings, it should be the mirror of the society in which we evolve. So I believe that this is where the answer is, rather than the quotas or allocations or so on. We have to make sure that what we see in our production is representative in the society in which we're living, and that it be an opened society.
And our last theme is the theme of the environment and the role of our sector in having a green society. What do you think the obligations that the industry has? What are they? And how do you think that you can help in politics to achieve those?
The problem
is we have to know where, you know, we have to, and how we have to take a look at the problem. We have to take a look at it from top down. So I believe that one of the first things is, how may I say, let's free ourselves from the addiction that we have for fossil, for fuel, and let's establish some goals for carbon neutrality, and we could go ahead towards these goals that we set, and we can have measures and positions.
We voted in favor of Bill C-12 in the Bloc Québécois because they agree with the 2050 carbon neutral goal. However, we believe that it is not a goal in and of itself to set an objective. We need to equip ourselves and adopt the tools and means and objectives, and often it's restrictive to set such objectives. So I think that's what's lacking now. We have a good objective, wonderful words, a good project. We're going to reduce greenhouse gas by 2030, 2040, 2050. That's all very well, but in concrete terms, we're really giving ourselves serious tools to meet those objectives. I think that's where it should start, by starting from the top down to make changes and to move away from fossil fuels and make a green transition. Starting from that point, should we bring in incentives for audiovisual production? For example, should we say that if they're carbon neutral, they could have a tax credit for productions? Or, for example, another example, the Bloc Québécois proposes a climate test for all legislation voted in the House of Commons. They should go through a climate test to make sure it does not have an impact on our greenhouse gas reduction goals and achieving carbon neutral status in 2050. The same model could be used for organizations, for productions, or for any applicants for subsidies from federal programs. So there are models like this which we could perhaps apply, but I think the first thing we need to do is stop beating around the bush and set objectives for which we do not equip ourselves or restrict ourselves in any way to be sure we achieve them. At one point, as we say, you know, walk the talk.
Well, that's a good statement from a politician, I must say. So last question from the audience, we have time for that, and that is the question about Radio-Canada and its future as far as the Bloc is concerned.
Ma foi, c'est une question très large.
Well, it's a very broad question. If you want to talk about the future of Radio-Canada, personally, I think that our public broadcaster is an essential component of our broadcasting landscape. Are there things to be reviewed in the current format of Radio-Canada? Certainly. I would be fully agreeing with a discussion about that. I was surprised that there was nothing or virtually nothing about Radio-Canada in Bill C-10, because as I said, Radio-Canada is a major aspect in our broadcasting landscape, and I expected to see certain proposals appearing, but that was not the case. However, I think there's certainly a reflection process and a lot of discussion that we ought to have. Some say, for example, that we should review the financing model for Radio-Canada. Certain proposals were put forward, for example, no longer offer public financing for news broadcasts and keep it for variety broadcasters, all sorts of other ideas circulating around. But if you want to ask me about the future of our public broadcaster, I think we should protect this resource because it's an important component of our broadcasting system.
Protect and encourage. In other words, does it have the funding that it needs to do the job that you're asking of it?
Ce n'est pas une question à laquelle je peux vous fournir une réponse.
It's not a question I can really give you an answer to specifically today. I think there may be things that ought to be examined in greater depth. Some might say that Radio-Canada receives too much financing. Others would say it needs more. We'll have to take a look at the needs and the real expectations from our public broadcaster. And it's not up to me to answer that. I think that every stakeholder has the right to pronounce themselves on that. And in my opinion, there's a much more complex and in-depth question to debate than just asking me what I think about the financing levels for Radio-Canada, whether it's too much or not enough.
Well, you're quite correct that it is a very complex question, and thank you for pointing that out. It's not simple. Thank you very much.
Merci.
Merci, M. Champoux.